Welcome everyone to our Focus 45. This is our signature monthly lecture series that features staff and friends of the museum talking about a variety of topics. We're really excited today to have Jurij and Jim here to talk about what's happening with cinema right now in the current COVID-19 crisis and how we're going to be moving forward. When do we get to return to the theater? Our next talk is going to be on August 14th, and this is going to be a talk featuring Lisa Hostetler, commemorating the ratification of the 19th Amendment and looking at photography relating to feminist movements. So we hope you'll also join us for that one. But for now, let's get started talking about theaters and what we can do to get back in those seats and back watching real film. Jurij, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kate, so much. I am Jurij Case, Curator of Film Exhibitions at the Dryden Theater in the George Eastman Museum. And as this was conceived, it was going to be sort of an all-star lineup of current and former curators at the Dryden Theater to get together to talk about different perspectives on cinema at this time and whether or not or how we can move forward with the current crisis and getting people back into theaters to experience the film itself. But first, I would like to welcome and introduce my one live guest today, Jim Healy, who was Assistant Curator in the Moving Image Department at the George Eastman Museum from 2001 to 2010. Jim, how are you?
I'm good, Jurij. It's good to be talking to you and with you. And it's good to be back in Rochester, virtually speaking, I guess.
And so tell us about the past decade. What have you been doing, keeping up for those who are familiar with you?
Right. A lot of the same. I'm here in Madison, Wisconsin, where I am the Director of Programming of the Cinematheque at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which screens films mostly year-round, during the academic seasons anyway, for free on campus. And we have two theaters. We screen films regularly in a campus building known as Vilas Hall, which is a lecture hall and office space for a lot of my colleagues. And in an auditorium at the Chazen Museum of Art, which is the campus art museum just across the street from Vilas Hall, where my office is, or where my office was before the quarantine began a few months ago. I'm also Director of Programming of the Wisconsin Film Festival, which has grown to become an 8-day event in April. 150 films of feature and short length from all over the world. And it's one of the largest cultural events in the Midwest. We have close to 30,000 viewers every year who come to see films in the festival. Extremely popular. And it also was canceled in April. While it was in February or March, we found out it was canceled just about a week after tickets went on sale. So that's largely what I've been doing for most of the last 10 years. For the last several months, I've been at home, like a lot of people, and we were trying to figure out different ways to remind people of the Cinematheque and the film festival, and remind people that the theaters are still there, and we hope to be filling the seats again fairly soon.
Yeah, there is a lot to unpack just with those few paragraphs that you gave us. And we'll come back to that, but I do want to bring in our absent special guest, who is the previous curator of film exhibitions prior to me at the Dryden Theater, Jurij Meden. I did record a conversation with him a couple of weeks ago, so I'd like to share that with you right now.
Jurij Meden, how are you?
Jurij, I'm great. How are you?
It's been about 2 years since you left Rochester, New York, and you are now homing in Austria, in Vienna. Tell us about what you're doing for the audience that hasn't seen you in a couple.
You are right. It has been almost precisely 2 years since I left. And now I'm basically doing exactly the same thing as I was doing in Rochester, but in Vienna. My position is the same. It's not officially called Curator of Film Exhibitions. I'm simply a curator in charge of film program, but my job is the same. The big difference, of course, is that Vienna is a vastly different city than Rochester. Not bigger or better, just different. And as a curator, I think that it's the local specifics, the local traditions that one should really respect almost most of all. And unlike Rochester, we are doing 2 to 3 screenings per day. So I do have a bit more work than in Rochester.
A lot of work, but a lot of fun work.
Yeah.
At least up until a few months ago when everything shut down. And as programmers around the world, we're dealing with the same thing. You and I have been keeping in touch in terms of how we're differently dealing within the different time frames the Eurobot is on versus the United States. Can you tell us about your experience with shutting down and possibly reopening?
Well, we shut down our cinema along with everything else that got shut down in Vienna in mid-March, on March 13th to be precise. It was actually Friday the 13th. But unlike you guys in the States, we were very, very lucky to be able to flatten the curve. I need to knock on wood right now. So public life has returned to Austria already in early May, and we have reopened our cinema a week ago on July 2nd. Now, during the lockdown, I remember we had a couple of interesting conversations. During the lockdown, I noticed that a lot of venues, but not only venues, film producers, distributors, exhibitors, have in a way reinvented themselves as streaming platforms in order to maintain their presence. And this was something that we thought about a lot here in Vienna, but in the end decided not to do, because we thought that this might be a tricky, potentially even a dangerous path to follow, because it is my personal opinion that what this corona crisis really did was it showed us how the world will look like, maybe in 10 years, maybe in 20 years, but it showed us a world without cinemas. And no matter how hard we try in our work, fact of the matter is that on a global level, less and less people are going to the cinemas, and more people are watching films at home, either buying DVDs or Blu-rays or streaming or illegally downloading. And these pandemics just showed that 100% of all the viewing can happen at home, and not much will change really. If I'm not mistaken, major Hollywood studios have realized that they can make just as much money by bypassing cinemas. And a lot of them, I think Universal was the first one, just simply decided to release their major titles online as opposed to waiting for the end of the pandemics. So for this purpose, we stayed completely closed and didn't put anything online during the crisis. The idea being that we are not just in the business of preserving cinema. One of our perhaps even more important missions is preserving the audience, preserving the idea of public space. And that's something that we kind of tend to forget. And I think we should always be aware of that. So we didn't do anything. And now we reopened with a big bang. And I can say now that we were right. People have returned, not to the cinemas, but to our film museum in great numbers.
Yeah, you were mentioning that you sold out the first 2 weeks for the cinema. Is that right?
Yeah. So when we were thinking about what to do when we reopen, the first thing that was discussed between me and my colleagues, mostly my colleagues from the archive, is they told me, whatever you do in July, August, September, please rely on our collection. Now is not the time to create super elaborate film programs. Now is not the time to work with 50 film archives all over the world to put together a massive retrospective, which I would usually do. Let's focus on our own collection because it's big and it's beautiful. Simply because we don't know what will happen tomorrow. Borders might close again, shipping might become impossible. So we have put together a summer program of some of the most beautiful or rare prints from our own collection. And the idea was simply to showcase our collection. And I was very skeptical, I have to admit. I thought that people will not return to the cinema so easily. Because, like the idea of leaving your safe apartment for sitting in a closed space for 2 hours with maybe 100 other people, it's kind of scary today. I was also very skeptical because the museums in Austria have opened already in mid-May, I think. And the attendance was a disaster. A museum that would ordinarily have thousands of visitors per day would now see one person per day. People simply didn't return. Okay, it's true that most of these visitors in Vienna were tourists, but still, several bars which have reopened also had to close because people just refused to go to bars. So when we were creating this summer program, we went from 1 screening per day to only 4 screenings per week. And we went from 1 screening per day every day in a week to only weekend screenings. And we went from 2 screenings per day to only 1 per day, because we didn't want to risk so much. But then when we announced the program, which was when we last talked a couple of weeks ago, we instantly sold out first 2 weeks. Now, after 4 days of screenings, I can very proudly say that we are completely sold out between now and the end of August. I mean, to be precise, we don't sell tickets online. People can reserve their seats. Which means if anybody from Vienna is watching this, even though we have officially booked everything, come to the Film Museum at 8 o'clock. Maybe somebody who made the reservation will not show up. There are always at least 2, 3, 4 people who don't show up, and we might get you in. But yeah, I mean, it was a great surprise. Also because other cinemas in the city are not doing that well. All the art house cinemas are open, and they're mostly showing, it sounds horrible if I say smaller titles, fantastic films, just not Top Gun Part 2. But people are kind of reluctant to go to the cinema. Whereas we have promoted our summer program in the sense of this is what cinema is. 35 millimeter, big screen. All these things which your living room simply cannot and never will provide.
Yeah, that's always been an issue, is promoting cinema. My rote answer, or my rote talk about it, is that cinema is immediate, in that you cannot pause it. You have to make an appointment with cinema. It is immersive, in that you have the large screen, but you also have the sound all around you to put you inside the work. And it is communal, so that you have those other people, and it's those micro reactions that you absorb and bring into your viewing experience that you just don't get with home theater. But it's also, in addition to that, it's about the artifact. It's about recreating that original experience that people had when the film was originally seen. So it's not just about the colors and the images that are moving on the screen. It's about the way that you see it, and in what format, because it has a different effect on your brain if you're seeing something on 35 millimeter than it does on digital. And you seem to have had a very successful communication with your audience about that, because if you say that they're coming back to your theater for the next 6 or 7 weeks. But how are you keeping them safe? What have you had to implement in order to deal with the virus and everything that comes along with it?
So first of all, Jared, if you allow me, I would like to comment a little bit on these 3 elements that you have mentioned. I think this was a brilliant definition of why it's important to keep cinemas alive. The first thing you said was you make an appointment with the cinema. And it's something that sounds so simple, and yet it's tremendously important. I noticed that every time I'm sitting at home on a couch, watching something on Netflix, it always takes me 1 or 2 more hours to sit through something because it's just so easy to get distracted, and you do get distracted. This idea of making an appointment and knowing that there's no way out, you simply need to devote your attention for the next 2 hours to the big screen. It helps vastly with appreciating cinema, with intellectually understanding what you're watching, with experiencing different emotions. So, this is something that is incredibly important. But now to answer your question, I made it sound as if, this is the Wild West here and we just opened the cinema and we're selling tickets. No, of course we are following very, very strict recommendations and rules and regulations that were imposed both by the state and the city. Truth be told, these things are a little bit fluid because they change from day to day. So one day over here, one needs to wear a mask to go to a shop. On another day, they say it's not necessary anymore. So people are a little bit confused, which is why we are very strict and clear about how to behave. So we really encourage people to make reservations online and then just come to the film museum at a fixed hour to pick up their ticket, because we want to avoid having crowds in our lobby. Our lobby is not that big. We are very strict with enforcing masks in the lobby. But then, according to rules in Austria, as you are entering the cinema, you are supposed to wear a mask, but once you sit down, you can remove it. We let people decide what they want to do, of course. We can tell them to keep the mask on if the overall rule of the land is that you're allowed to remove it. But a lot of people actually continue watching films with the mask. What we did then was we also, we were of course forced to reduce vastly our capacity. We can only accommodate about 43% of our usual capacity, which would translate into about 70-75 people per screening. So when I say we're sold out, it's not a major success, but it's still more than some other cinemas which have the average of 5 or 10 people per screening. And we have created a sort of a, like we have eliminated certain seats so that when people sit, they're now spread all over the space. But we did keep certain seats together. So if you're a couple, you can stay together. But if you bring both your boyfriend and your husband and want to sit together, then you can't. It's only 2 people.
Do you have any concessions at the museum, or people drinking or eating or anything? Is that a concern?
We don't. We are a film museum, just like the Jurij Eastman Museum. So people, fortunately or unfortunately, cannot eat. But we do allow water, of course, especially in these hot days. We do have air conditioning, but still water is allowed. But we don't sell anything. So we don't have the problem with that. We also, because we only do 1 show per day, we don't have the problem of this meticulous disinfection of the space between 2 shows, because that's also something you're supposed to do. And I hear from colleagues that it takes them an hour to actually properly clean the space according to all the rules and regulations. And this is not something that we have to deal with. We do disinfect, but we do it slowly each morning.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Jurij, for bringing your perspective and experience on this crisis from the European point of view. It's always great to see you. And if you have a message for our Jurij Eastman Museum audience out there, love to hear it.
You have surprised me now, Jared, by inviting me to send a message. There are so many things I would love to say to so many people in Rochester right now. But I will just say that I miss you guys very, very much. And I hope to see you again soon.
The first thing I'm thinking of is his suggestion that people in the audience might be bringing their husbands and boyfriends to the movie is a Viennese conceit, at least by way of Ernst Lubitsch, I think. But I agree with a lot of what he said. Here in Madison, we've decided to offer free movies every week the way we normally would during our summer season. We actually began back in May. We've had at least one selection every week that viewers can request online and can watch it at home. And that in itself has allowed us to remind everyone that we're still out there and still providing free programming. But it's really the best thing about it has been the idea that we've found a different way to connect to the community, and even the community that spreads outside of Madison, because we've made these films accessible to anyone who wants to request them within the limited means we have to screen them. But the thing that's been really exciting in terms of connecting with the community has been our podcast, which is called Cinematheque, which we launched late last year with a few episodes, but got off the track when we got busy programming the Wisconsin Film Festival. So for myself and our programming team, which includes Mike King, Ben Reiser, now Pauline Lampert, formerly Zachary Zahos. We were all kind of immersed in the film festival, and now we're back on line with offering these films, and we have the time to devote to the podcast now. So for every weekly selection offering we've put out there, we've put out an episode of Cinematheque where the films at hand are discussed in some way. We've had a few special guests on too.
These films are from your own collection or just generally available? No, we're working with distributors in sort of the same way we would for theatrical exhibition, except that the what is being offered or what is being distributed at the moment has real limits. There are a handful of independent American films and foreign films that would normally have been receiving a theatrical release at this time, or since quarantine began, that have decided to go, strictly online, or I guess virtual. I don't really know what virtual cinema means. It's either cinema or it's not, right? You're either watching a movie in a cinema or you're watching something at home. So we've called it Cinematheque at home. But even that's not entirely accurate too. So we've been working with distributors that have some things new to offer. A few distributors have pretty extensive catalogs, so we haven't been limited to just new releases. For instance, last week we showed a couple rare Peter Sellers films. We screened a great spaghetti western, Il Grande Silenzio by Sergio Corbucci. And then we've done new films too. So this week we're offering a new, pretty compelling new film by the Ross brothers, Bill and Turner Ross, who make these documentary fiction hybrids. It's called Bloody Nose, Empty Pockets, and it's filmed during the last night of a bar that's about to close, and it's populated with the actual people who are going to the bar. They're the characters in the film. And so our podcast this week has a discussion with the Ross brothers, who reveal, among other things, that the bar was not actually closing. That was just a conceit that they came up with for the film. Your comment about cinema and whether it is or it isn't really leads into that sort of dark abyss that we're trying to traverse between what cinematheques and film museums are promoting as the cinematic experience and the original experience for how you're supposed to see these works, while you and I are caught in this cycle of trying to maintain the visibility of our programs and provide curation for people that may not have it. Have you used any sort of moral code or anything going forward with how you're doing that and making sure that what we are doing is not replacing what we do on a normal basis and making sure those audiences are coming back?
Yeah, I mean, some of the things we've screened, El Grande Silencio, to just cite one example, is a film that we have shown previously in the Wisconsin Film Festival, in fact. So we have offered that theatrical experience again, and it's a way for people who maybe missed it can catch up with it and see it that way. So that's one way of thinking about it. Everything that we've shown so far, and we have made choices. There have been a lot of things that have been pushed on us that we've said no thanks to, because as a film, as a movie, it doesn't meet our criteria or qualifications, or if it's not something that we would show in a cinema, then it's probably not something worth showing here. So Bloody Nose Empty Pockets was supposed to screen in the film festival. It didn't. So we want to give people a chance to show it and just kind of remind people about what sort of programming we do. So yes, I mean, it's important that anything that we're showing now is something that we would want to show in a cinema. This isn't, the movies themselves are not less than, but I think what we've really been emphasizing has not been watching the movies themselves, because that's just something we have so little control over right now. And I've heard about the various distributors who have tried these virtual cinema platforms, and it's just depending on the individual and what kind of system they have at home or computer or Wi-Fi. Just getting the films onto a viewing screen can be extremely difficult. And so programmers and distributors have taken on the roles of home tech managers, or doing maintenance on people's home entertainment systems or computers, and that's not something I particularly want to be in the role for. If there's something I can help with, I've tried. But so hopefully people are watching the films, seeing them as an artifact, hopefully being entertained or getting something out of them. But what we're really counting on as our contribution at the time has been our podcast as a way to kind of discuss it. And within the discussions of the various films we're showing, it's constantly come up, has been the discussion of, well, what are we missing without the theatrical experience right now? So that kind of has to be a component of it if we're showing something.
Yeah.
And reflect on the past too, and cinema past, and what the theatrical experience has been. So if we're showing something like, the Peter Sellers films, then part of the discussion is well, why didn't this get to the theaters, or what happened to it after it was shown in theaters, and so it's all part of the discussion.
Yeah, it's sometimes a bit heartbreaking when you're watching these screeners of films that are coming out virtually. There are things that I would have loved to shown on the big screen, like The Wolf House, the stop motion animation film that came out, or Beats, which came out from Music Box and has this masterful concert sequence that would just be overwhelming in the theater. And it's those sort of visual experiences, but it's also like Dan Sallett's 17.
Yeah.
14. Did that kind of experience that you want to have with other people because you want to talk about it later. And what it meant, and the subtle things that are going on within the film that, you sit at home and watch it and you look around and there's nobody to talk about it with.
That's true. And you mentioned the very film we started our free screening series, which was 14. Mm-hmm. And then we had a we did have that discussion with Dan Salid on our podcast, and hopefully that makes up for part of what you're missing when you're not in a theater and can turn to a stranger or somebody you're with afterwards, and just sit around and have that discussion.
So in terms of getting people back to the cinema, what is the state of the state in Wisconsin with cinemas and getting people back in general? And then how is it specifically affecting you at the university?
Right. Commercial cinemas are still not open. Except for a couple drive-in theaters in the area, which have been showing kind of repertory classics. The one nearest us showed The Warriors and The Bad News Bears last month, and I wasn't able to make up the trips. I saw them both recently, but I almost would have gone. That sounds like fun. So those drive-ins are open, but all the commercial cinemas are open, and we have mandates for wearing masks indoors here in the state, and a few other things that I don't know if commercial cinemas are specifically prohibited from opening at this time. I don't think they are. I think with certain precautions like number of people in the room. Perhaps in the county I'm in now, which is Dane County, it's a different situation than the rest of the state. I've just assumed that most commercial theaters, and by commercial I mean theaters that charge admission. So I mean everything from art houses to multiplexes have been closed because the new product is just not there to justify the opening, or is not there to lure ticket buyers.
Yeah, it's sort of an Ouroboros, right? You can't open until there's product, but you have to guarantee that there's product in order to open.
Right. And a lot of people are scared, I think, in terms of putting something out there that's new and exciting that maybe costs $200 million to make, and to risk whether or not people feel safe enough to go to sit in a room and to justify whatever box office returns that's going to yield. I don't know. So at the university it's a different story, because as I said, we screen our films for free at the Cinematheque anyway. We charge admission for the Wisconsin Film Festival. And so we have put together a set of safety precautions for reopening, scattered seating, regular cleaning, other policies and procedures that would need to be enacted to ensure safety and make people feel safer. But there's a couple of problems in that school is resuming with some in-person classes at the beginning of September. And so the university is, I think, waiting to see how that all unfolds. And we also have to have a certain amount of time to lay in a schedule, figure out what we're going to show, how many people can come, what kind of films we can and should be showing. And so right now it's all a bit of a wait and see. We're waiting to see what happens with commercial theaters. Mm-hmm. That may or may not be a factor. If commercial theaters don't resume, there might still be a possibility that our Cinematheque can resume at some level. And we're waiting to see what happens at the university. And then there'll be a number of other protocols that we'll have to go through very immense university bureaucracy that has at its heart right now, at its highest point of interest, the well-being of the students, as it should be. So before all our protocols can be reviewed and all our revisions and suggestions for changes can be reviewed, I think the university has other things they want to consider first. So it could be a while for us before our Cinematheque is able to show films in our screening rooms again. I think best guess for now would be probably the last 2 or 3 months of the year, but that's, I think, being extra hopeful. It's quite possible we won't be able to open again until next year. We're prepared to keep offering films to watch at home with our podcasts. We'll have a few hiatus breaks where we'll be putting together new programming and new podcasts, and we'll need to take some breaks, but we should be able to go once a week with something new, starting when the academic year resumes in September, at least through the end of the year.
You may remember exactly how far ahead we have to plan at the George Eastman Museum for programming with our bi-monthly publication that we put out. So considering that we've been closed since the end of last year anyway for construction, had a lot of time to think about how to put things together. And we've had 5 potential opening dates, anticipating getting into phase 4 and being able to reopen. But from June 1st with the Nitrate Picture Show through July 1st, and now 3 different dates in August, still planning and hoping to go forward. But we've also been planning for people to come back into the theater. And what we've heard from medical professionals is that social distancing and face coverings are going to be the way to prevent the spread until there is a vaccine that can be administered, right? It can't just be, a vaccine has been found and now everybody can go back to normal. It has to be administered to much of the population before anything can stop. So we have a 500-seat theater at the Dryden that I have gone through and marked out specific seats, singly maintaining 2 seats in between patrons and every other row, which has limited our capacity down to 96 as a maximum, just based on social distancing. But that's not saying that state regulations aren't going to drop that even further. But we are going to make sure to maintain people wearing masks throughout the film. We also do not have concessions, so we don't have to worry about people opening their mouths and breathing out to get a drink or pop some popcorn. So we're not as concerned about that, but we do want to maintain that distance. And it's just, making sure that we have the ability legally to go ahead and do that. Based on my planning, I've already got films scheduled for August 18th, hoping that we can open back up after construction is fairly complete. And then September and October are already planned out, and I'm thinking about November and December. I don't know if you heard that Jack Garner passed away a couple of weeks ago. So there's.
I did hear. He was a great friend, and I miss him. I'm glad I got to see him last summer.
Yeah.
In Rochester, but.
Yeah, so we've got possibly a series dedicated to films that he helped curate or introduce while he was at the Dryden, or based on his writings in the past. So, I'm already thinking about these things. It's the Satyajit Rai's centennial next year. I'm starting to plan for that already. So,
but it's Charles Bronson's centennial too, Jared.
Well, we'll make sure to put a couple of them in there.
Of course, good.
Maybe not a full retrospective.
Mr. Majestic, maybe?
Well, yeah, I do like some Don Siegel. He's
that's Richard Fleischer, but Elmore Leonard wrote it.
Yeah, even better.
Yeah.
I know he was in. It was a Telephone, I think.
Telephone, yeah, that's his one Siegel film.
Yeah. But so it really does seem to be. I mean, we have, as programmers, as curators, been in this holding pattern, trying to figure out when we can do what, and. Yeah. It is frustrating, but it is, as you say, not only for the students at the school, but for our own patrons. We want to give them that cinematic experience, but we want to make sure we can do it in a safe way. We're at 1:45 now, and I know I've seen some questions come up. There was one from someone who is hoping to do live streaming, and you addressed a little bit what you were doing with distributors. Is there some other way that you can work with distributors to do, say, a Twitch or something live as they're being projected in the audience? I wouldn't think that there's an easy way to do that, but in working with distributors for doing something live from your own theater.
I think some people have tried that. Is that, I mean, what's the idea that you're watching the screen of the theater?
Yeah.
Or you're just sharing it? Okay. No, we haven't done that. We had a live performance scheduled for September of musicians playing with a silent film. And we just had to cancel that. We did investigate for a while. Well, what, if we screen the film and people can hear the music being performed live, is there a way to do that? And it just added a lot of expense to things. And the real problem was that the musicians have to travel.
Yeah.
And that wasn't going to work out. So we've just kind of postponed the event for a year. But no, we haven't done anything like that. I don't know how much fun that would be to watch a screen on a screen. But I don't know. It would have to be something special that, something ultra meta,
Yeah, it's a different form of distribution that they don't really have a plan for, I don't think. And I think it would take some negotiation with the distributor to be able to do that, because they have theatrical and they have non-theatrical, and they know how to do that. So doing something beyond that might take some different negotiation.
We've toyed with making the podcast a commentary track, where it would run the length of the film, and then you could watch the film and then watch it again and listen to the podcast if you sync it up just right. We're still kind of in the discussions of doing that. That's something different, I understand, but it's, maybe makes it a little more immediate. But like Jurij said, it's something that's just closer, just reminds you of what home viewing is, and not
right.
It's not something to do. We've actually toyed in the past with doing a live commentary in the theater.
Oh yeah,
where we've screened a film and then thought about and running it a second time with the filmmaker there and having them.
Yeah, I'd love to do that with Major League.
Oh, Major League, that would be fun.
Yeah. There's another question I saw, which is one of my favorite questions of all time. Memorable cinematic experiences.
Oh, in general or at the Dryden?
In general. It could be at the Dryden.
Yeah.
I keep like a list in my head. Like there's Star Wars at the Drive-In, City Lights at the Opera House in Bologna. How to West was one at the Cinerama Dome.
You got me there.
Once Upon a Time in West at the Dryden was one of my favorites. And of course, Nitrate, the Babes in Toyland with Laurel and Hardy. That was the last time that print was able to be shown. So that's sort of special to me that I was one of the last pair of eyes to see that print.
Yeah, there's a lot of things you just made, because we were talking about Mr. Majestic. I got to watch 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea at the Dryden, sitting next to the 88 or 89-year-old director of the film who whispered in my ear the whole time. And that was one of the few occasions where I not only allowed it, I welcomed it.
Live commentary. And that was great. Dick Fleischer. So many, that's why we do what we do and why we're talking about this, right? Because there are too many to count. So many formative ones for me. I've come to realize recently that when I was 8 years old, I saw Jaws, Star Wars, and Close Encounters of the Third Kind in a theater, all for the first time within 2 months of each other because of the way films were being released and re-released then. I was able to do that. And if that isn't something that kind of sets you up for
sets up your fate. I don't know what is. But that's early. As a teenager, having to go do a destination trip to see an art film that was playing in Chicago when I was living out in the suburbs. So, getting all my friends together and people who could drive and had cars to, we have to go see Brazil, like for a second or third time, or we have to go see Sid and Nancy, because we have to make the trip, and so the effort to the trip itself becomes the event, not just the film. The films are wonderful, and the films are why you remember it, partially, but it's also because of the actual act of going. Now, I've said this before on a couple of our podcasts and to other people, but and you were talking with Jurij about the qualities that make a cinematic experience. It's communal, it's in the dark, it's on a giant screen that you can't get at home. But I think now with the quarantine, it's not going to the movies. What we miss the most is just that going, having somewhere to go, having a destination and a place in mind to experience this, and to as Jurij was saying, to literally escape from distractions. That's why the biggest offense for me anyone can make in a theater is not talking, or having a discussion. That sometimes can be fine, especially if the movie's boring. But is cell phones and having something light up, because it's literally the outside world coming in, and why we're all not there with the purpose of looking at the one screen,
right?
And so those personal distractions that someone might be having is affecting everyone around them who can see them. So hopefully we'll remember that when we return to theaters, to turn our phones off and or just leave them at home. The destination is part of the experience.
As much as those micro reactions can enhance your experience, the phones or the lights can detract from the experience just out of the corner of your eye.
Yeah. And then memorable theaters themselves. I had a lot of great theaters that I frequented, still do. But then there was, the one time I got to see a film at the Chinese Theater in LA, and I've actually been there twice. The half dozen times I got to go to the Ziegfeld in New York City, which it's actually a contemporary theater. It was built in the late 60s, but it was, a real palace. And when you went to New York, at least during the few trips I made there as a young person, that was as big an event as seeing a Broadway play. Theaters themselves can be, wonderful, special, grand places, but even on a smaller scale, they can be inspiring and mysterious and wonderful places to return to, with their own kind of personalities and designs that help you remember, make the experience of going as important as the film that you're seeing.
There's a specialness to the experience and to the theaters that is not there when you're watching something on the screen or at home, where it's the same sort of experience, right? You're just changing out the subject that you're watching. It's you on the couch or in your chair, the same way you always are, probably wearing the same sweatpants and just watching a different thing. Whereas every time you go to the theater, you got somebody different sitting next to you. There's a different number of people in the theater, and what you're watching is different and enhances that.
Absolutely. Very much so.
Kate, was there any other questions you saw that came through you think would be good for Jim and I to tackle?
Yeah, there's a question that someone had seen that in European countries there is funding going to support arts theater, small film venues. Have you heard of anything like that in the United States?
I mean, no. not specifically for cinemas. There is the CARES Act, which has been doing a lot in terms of helping out different institutions, but I don't think that I have heard of anything specifically for cinemas, but it could very well be needed for some of these smaller venues if they're going to survive past the pandemic and these closures. As Jim says, if we're not opening up again until next year, that is a long time to be closed, and to have people unemployed and to lose that revenue because just because you're not showing movies doesn't mean you don't have to pay rent or have any other expenses going on.
I got an email the other day from a small theater chain, a national theater chain, very small compared to AMC. And they have one venue here in Madison, and they were basically asking to sign a petition for congressional relief. Mm-hmm. It's the first one of that kind I've seen, and I don't know if it was because of the size of their operations, and I've heard of other smaller theater chains that have had to lay off staff, and so it's something to think about, and something to be concerned about, I think, too, especially with the Paramount decree being shot down last year. Is this now an opportunity for the corporations that own studios, or the studios themselves, which are mega corporations, to get back into the cinema owning game? And
right.
I won't say if that's a bad or good thing right now. I guess we'd have to wait and see. I don't know that we want to wait and see. I think fair is fair, and I think there should be support if it can be provided for smaller businesses.
Yeah. Any other questions, Kate?
There's a quick question of Jim. Could you share that petition? And we're going to follow up with everyone within the next week with an e-news, so we could potentially include a link to that. And we can also address some of the other questions. We are out of time, though, at this point, so I'll just leave with one final question for Jurij and Jim. So theaters are hopefully opening soon. What's the first film you want to go out and see?
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you exactly what it is, because it's showing at the Dryden. Should we open on August 18th? It's called Going Attractions, the story of the drive-in theater. A documentary about the history of drive-ins. That whole first week that I've planned is celebrations of the cinema. There's a follow-up documentary about movie palaces, Smallest Show on Earth. Abel Ferrara is the projectionist, and a supercut movie called Have You Seen My Movie, which is all about people going to movies in the movies. And it's sort of a narrative cut of going to the theater, watching the film, and coming back out. So it's a lot of fun.
When we opened our screen at the Chazen Museum of Art here, the first full series we did was called Projecting the Cinema. And it was only movies set in movie theaters. So that was from an international perspective. There was a Uruguayan film called A Useful Life, which is about the shutting down of a museum cinematheque. We showed Joe Dante's Matinee and Inglourious Bastards and Abbas Kiarostami's Shirin, a French movie called Porn Theater. And we showed short films that worked around that. For me, I hope we can resume our some of the films we had to cancel this spring. We had announced half of our Cinematheque schedule for the spring was canceled, so I'm looking forward to seeing the Luis Buñuel film, the Archibaldo de la Cruz. When we reopen again, we also had Carl Reiner's Where's Papa on our spring schedule, and now, unfortunately, it'll be a posthumous screening for Carl Reiner, but still a funny film. A movie we showed at the Dryden a couple of times when I was there. and and hopefully commercial cinemas, there'll be an opportunity for us to safely see Tenet and Wes Anderson's film, which the something Dispatch, I forget the title. French Dispatch. Looking forward to those.
I think that there is hope based on Yuri's conversation that there are places opening up as we get to a point where it's safer to go back into public spaces. There are plans in place, things that we can do to follow that example and make sure that there's not more spikes. Thank you, Jim, so much for joining us and having this conversation. Maybe we should, as this develops, make this a regular thing where we talk about what's going on at that current time and anything else that's coming out and we're excited about.
Count me in. I'm happy to do it.
Sounds great. All right. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. And look out for that email from Kate. And make sure you drop in any questions that we might be able to answer. Thanks for joining us. Come back next time.